Hi everyone and welcome to The Nudge. My name is Cecile Ahrens and I have a clinical practice in San Diego, California. Today's topic is on relationship abuse or domestic violence. Relationship abuse occurs when one person is trying to exert power and control over their partner and or their children. The types of abuse are physical abuse, verbal, emotional, or mental abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, and spiritual abuse. There are many reasons why this unfortunate phenomenon exists in the first place. Typically, victims or survivors are locked in a dysfunctional relational pattern, and at the heart of an abusive relationship is love. The person also loves their partner even though their partner is abusive, so it becomes incredibly confusing. At the center of an abusive relationship are the power and control dynamics that I mentioned. And as you can imagine, if somebody is constantly being put down and made to believe that they're unworthy or they're not going to find another person to love them, or if they've been depleted of resources, or if they've been controlled to the point where they are dependent on their partner, it really is very difficult to leave or end this unhealthy relationship. Typically, abusers or people who abuse other people, I just don't like the term abusers, it kind of oversimplifies things, but they are abusing other people. Typically, they are also victims themselves. They have also witnessed and experienced abuse themselves, and so they tend to repeat the cycle. And typically, victims and survivors are also have been victimized themselves. Broadly speaking here, obviously, a person who's never been abused can also suffer or experience being abused by a person. But typically, those people end up being able to break the cycle a lot easier because they don't have, all the other risk factors that typically make it harder for people to end these relationships. So the main reasons it's hard also for people to leave these relationships is not only love, but the hope and the fear. The hope that the partner will change because the relationship isn't always bad, and sometimes, things are really awesome and great and loving and stable. And the fear of the unknown, the fear of not being able to make it without this person, the fear of, one's life or physical safety in extreme cases of domestic violence. When a partner literally says, if you leave or if you report me to the police, I will kill you. That's the extreme form of domestic violence. And this is a real community problem and a major public health issue, which I can't really get into in such a short amount of time. The purpose for today is just to educate you guys and help you recognize what the red flags are and to hopefully seek help and support. There's different severity. There's, some people have an abusive relationship where there's no physical abuse, but there's mental, emotional, and maybe financial abuse. And then you have, other relationships where there's a just constant physical abuse. So think of this as a continuum in terms of level of severity, that not all abusive relationships look one way or the same. However, that doesn't mean that if you're on the milder end, if you can even call it that, of an abusive relationship, that it's okay. Abuse is never okay, and it usually will have inevitable harm to your emotional and psychological health, if not also your physical health. Because the toll that it takes on your body when you're constantly absorbing abuse from somebody cannot be underestimated. And there are real physiological and physical effects from being in these kinds of relationships, to the point of PTSD, major depression, anxiety disorders, substance abuse. The list can go on and on. And today also, I'm not going to talk about the violence or abuse that is perpetuated by people who are sociopathic or psychopathic or have psychotic disorders, because again, we don't have really time to delve into that deeply. So one of the big issues that victims face is not having the resources and self-esteem and self-efficacy to break the cycle of abuse in their lives. What is self-efficacy? Self-efficacy is the belief that you can do it, is the belief that you're going to be okay, is the belief that you're going to be able to figure life out without this partner. So it takes, statistically speaking, at least 7 times, according to the stats, to leave a very abusive relationship. And that's because of all those factors I just talked about: the not having enough self-esteem, questioning yourself, the person actually like saying sorry and, trying to make up for the aggressive or abusive behavior, and it becomes a cycle. And so the cycle is usually honeymoon stage. That's when things are pretty stable, pretty calm, probably really loving and happy at times. And then it moves into what's called a tension building stage. That's when you start to walk on eggshells, or you start to, get the sense that, if I don't behave in a certain way, if I don't say the right things, that I am going to get abused. And then the explosion stage is where you are being abused, either physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, sexually, spiritually. And the cycle goes on and on and on, to the point where you no longer have much of a honeymoon stage. And some people have told me they actually just didn't have a honeymoon stage towards the end of the relationship. And it just is a cycle between you walking on eggshells and trying to, prevent an abuse, which, by the way, you can't, and then an explosion. So it just becomes this tension building explosion stage. And as you can imagine, the kind of havoc that will do to you is really hard to measure. But the good news is there is hope. There are resources out there. There are a lot of services who can help you and who understand the predicament that you're in. And also for people who have this abusive issue, for perpetrators, I want you to know that you can also break the cycle of violence in your life, that it doesn't have to be this way. You deserve help, just like victims do, because most likely you were victimized yourself. There were probably a lot of unmet needs in your own life that caused you to handle your anger and pain and depression in such a way where you thought, I need to control people, places, and things in my life in order for me to feel okay. And I need to use aggression and violence in order for things to feel okay. Those are learned behaviors. Those are conditioning. And I urge you to reach out, because as there are many services for victims or survivors, there are also a ton of services for you. Okay, so really please consider that. Take that to heart. For those who are trying to leave an abusive relationship and you're worried about your safety or your children's safety, please take caution and trust your gut. If you don't feel safe leaving in that particular moment, trust that. But do try to get some help so you can create what's called an exit or safety plan. You can do that by calling a domestic violence hotline or talking to a therapist who specializes in domestic violence. And I cannot stress that enough. You really want to find a specialist, because this isn't just your typical, run-of-the-mill relationships, not working out and people not getting along. Domestic violence is a specialized field, and you want to be with somebody or work with somebody who understands the intricacies and the nuances and the complications of trying to end this kind of a relationship. There's also the San Diego Access and Crisis Line if you reside in San Diego, and that number is 888-724-7240. And if you don't know what the hotline or crisis line is in your area, you could easily Google that and you will find it, no problem. The other thing too is to really seek the support of trusted friends and family. Start to break the silence of abuse. Oftentimes victims feel like, I can't talk about this, for real fear that there's going to be a threat to their safety, or because they're also, feeling protective of their perpetrator because they love them and they don't want their friends or family members to think badly of them. So all of those feelings are valid. It makes perfect sense why you would struggle with that. But talking to a skilled and seasoned professional will help you flesh out some of those fears and anxieties. And you deserve support. You and or your children deserve a life free from violence and abuse. Love is not abuse. Love is not violence. Love is not fear. So, just try to remember that. And there are also shelters that you can go to if the situation calls for that. You can take your children with you. Some of the shelters can even help you arrange services for your dogs. And the shelters are wonderful. I used to manage a shelter. You can call 24/7 and they will, figure out a way to get you in there. And inside the actual shelter, you don't have to worry about basic needs. There's typically individual and group counseling and case management services that they will help you out with. And then some services actually even offer transitional housing after your stay at the shelter. What that is say you stay at the shelter for 30 days, they move you to another residential type of home setting where you can start to really rebuild your life, and they help you with vocational skills, maybe even help get you ready to get a job and so forth. So there are many, many wonderful services out there in the community, but the first step is to just reach out. Reach out. You don't have to do this alone. And oftentimes victims can't do this alone. So just know that there is help out there for you. And the abuse is not your fault. It's not something that you did or didn't do. It's not something that you said or didn't say. Anything can be a trigger for an abusive person. And it could be completely irrational, and it usually always is. So just know that there's nothing you can do to change or rehabilitate your partner. Your partner, your abusive partner, is unfortunately struggling and in very severe pain oftentimes, and there's nothing you can do to help them change, because the decision to change must first and foremost come from them. I think that's pretty much it. So just to recap, relationship abuse is when somebody wants to exert power and control over you. Victims and perpetrators usually come from backgrounds where they were also victimized or abused themselves, and they're just repeating the pattern of what was modeled to them and what they experienced. Both can break the cycle and pattern of abuse, and there are many reasons why it is incredibly difficult to leave these relationships. So please, if you know somebody who's in this kind of a predicament, try not to judge them because they're already on some level